Okay, now it's time to get down and dirty with sound design, and we're going to move right into envelopes. Now, envelopes are a very important aspect of sound design. They allow you to really shape and craft your sound. Sort of the abstract way to think about envelopes is that they control a parameter or a sound and tell it how to behave over the course of time. So that's a little abstract, but let's look about it in principle. You'll notice here in Massive at the top with our amplitude section, the amp mod box has a number 4 located in there. That means that the 4th envelope here in the center window is assigned to the amplitude of the synthesizer. So this is the default setting because something has to control how the sound comes out of the synthesizer, the output, and that would be envelope number 4. So when we click here, you can see a visual representation here in the graphical display, and we have all these parameters that we're going to go over completely in just a moment. It should be said to begin with that different synthesizers have different ways of applying envelopes. Some synthesizers have a ton of different controls and options. Massive is one of those. Other synthesizers have a little bit more of a simple readout of how the envelopes are applied. But since we're dealing with Massive and we're learning sound design, let's just talk about what we can do here in Massive. So I said just a moment ago that an envelope tells a parameter how to behave over time. Our envelope number 4 is modulating the amplitude. So that means this envelope is telling Massive how to treat the amplitude or, the output of the sound over time. So a standard envelope has 4 controls: attack, decay, sustain, and release. So what do all of those mean? Let's first listen to this envelope as it's set up in its default setup. So when I strike a key, the sound starts almost immediately, and it continues at a full volume until I release the key, and then there is a tiny bit of sound that occurs or continues after I release the key. It's almost instantaneous at the beginning and the end of the key strike, but not quite. So let's walk through these 4 typical controls which are included here, and then we'll talk about what else is going on. First, let's talk about attack. Aptly named. Here in this box, you'll see there's an attack knob and a level knob. So the attack knob controls the length of time that it takes between when you strike the key to when it reaches full volume or the level that you've set to be full volume. So imagine for a moment an acoustic piano. What happens when you strike the key? It immediately makes a sound at full volume. And that what's happening is right when you hit that key, the beater hits the string inside the body of the piano. So that is an example of a very, very short attack time, just the length of time that it takes the beater to move forward. So that's almost an instantaneous attack time. Here in Massive, if you look at the attack knob, default set, it's not at full 0. It's there's a little bit of time, and even if it's pulled down all the way, there's still a ramp there, and that can become a problem later, which we'll talk about when we do kick drums. But you can see here in this graphical display, when I pull down the attack knob, this ramp becomes steeper and shorter, and that indicates that the length of time between striking the key and full volume is shorter and quicker. So that's the attack time. So let's listen to no attack. So that's right when I hit the key, basically right after the sound is coming out, right after I hit the key. When I draw this knob upward, you can see that the length of time from striking the key to full volume increases and slows down. You can sort of hear that swell becoming audible. Hear that attack swell in. You can also watch this master output meter, and you can see it fill up like a glass of water, and that indicates how the sound is swelling from 0 to full volume over time. So as I turn this attack knob up, the length of time that it takes to get from 0 to full volume increases. That is what we call attack. Next to the attack knob is a level knob. The level knob controls what that full volume is. So now the level knob is set all the way to the top. And so just like our piano analogy, you strike it and that's the loudest it's going to get. It's not going to get any louder than when you first strike it. But you can control this. You can pull that attack level down, and you can see that breakpoint in the beginning dropping down in the graphical display. So this parameter is controlling the output of the initial attack. So that will lead us into the next control, which is called decay. The decay controls the length of time that it takes for the sound to move from full volume down to its sustain level, and we'll get to sustain level in a second. And that's why it's called decay, because it describes the length of time that it takes the sound to decay down to its sustain level. So I can reduce the amount of time it takes to get from full volume to sustain level volume. Right now, since the sustain is all the way up, this is just a flat bar across. But you can see this region here in between these two breakpoints is indicating that decay time. So now what is this level knob? That's our sustain level. This controls the level of the sustain. Or in other words, it controls the level of the output volume when I'm just holding the key. So if I bring this down, you can see this graphical display dropping down in this little bend down. So if I bring it all the way down to the bottom, then I have this short attack and short decay. It'll just be like a little pluck. And now the decay is so short that it's inaudible. That decay time is just too short to even really produce a sound that you can hear. But if I pull this up, you'll start to hear a little bit of that pluck. And that's because the sustain level is all the way down. It doesn't matter how long I hold the key, because that output is dropping down according to the sustain level that I've set, which is down to 0, and according to the decay time, which is very short in this instance. And you can hear that blip as I increase this decay. If you're an M83 fan, that sound might sound sort of familiar. So that is decay time and the sustain level, and those are usually used in conjunction. So we'll skip this loop section for now. It's a little bit, let's just move straight over to the release knob. I'm going to raise that sustain back up. So the release is the last basic control. This controls the length of time that it takes for the sound to go from sustain level back down to 0 once you've released the key. So if I strike a key and hold it, that's the sustain level. When I let go, there is a length of time between letting go and when the sound stops. If the release knob is full left, that means there's a very, very short release time, and you can barely even hear the sound carrying out when I release the note. If you increase this release knob, when I release my note, you can hear it. You can hear the sound continue on and just sort of slowly fade out after I've released the key, and that's why it's called release. So those are the 4 controls: attack, decay, sustain, and release. In other synthesizers, you might see A, D, S, and R as labels on faders or knobs. So that's what that means: attack, decay, sustain, and release. So Massive has a few other parameters to talk about. Let's move over here to the left to the delay parameter. The delay knob controls the space of time between which you strike a key and when the envelope takes effect. So that's why it's called delay, because you're delaying the amount of time for the envelope to take effect. So right now, with the delay all the way down, my envelope is beginning right when I strike my key. So if I increase this delay knob, I'm telling the envelope to wait a moment before it takes effect. So when I strike the key, it will take just a little bit before that envelope to take effect. And if you can't hear me striking that key, then this might not make a whole lot of sense. But when you try it yourself, you'll see how if I increase this delay knob, I can put off the effects of the envelope for a certain amount of time. So that is the delay knob. Now, let's talk about this loop section. So this is a pretty cool aspect of Massive. It allows you to really play with the envelopes a lot. And in the next lecture, we'll talk about using envelopes and applying them to things other than just the amplitude. So the first thing that I need to do to apply the loop function is reduce our sustain levels so we have a little bit of breathing room here in our amplitude. So this is what it sounds like now. Okay. And there is an on and off box here next to the word loop. So if you click and drag, you can set a number value for the loops in the sustain portion, in the sustain stage of the envelope. I think it goes all the way up to 33, but you're probably not going to be using that many loops anyway. So now I have another node here, and I have a loop in my sustain stage. So now right now I have it set to 4 in the loop function. So that means that my sound is going to go up the attack ramp, decay down to the sustain level, and then in the middle of this sustain stage, the sound is going to move 4 times between this ramp here, and then it'll drop out when I release the key. So in this morph section, you can select any one of these drop-down options, and these are different shapes of that loop ramp. You can keep it linear like it is now, and you can click on the graphical display and move it around, and that will change your parameters. Or you can select, for example, your sine, and that'll give you a sine wave. The white line is the forward motion. The gray line is the reverse movement. So I can try a different option for the bottom morph drop down, and now I have that you can see that gray line will be this number 20 option here, which is kind of like a randomized square wave. So it's going to move up my attack down to the sustain, up the sine wave, and then down these steps, back up to the sine wave, down the steps again, and then out to the release. So you can hear that a little bit. And then it's done. So you have some strange and extreme shapes and curves here, which will allow you to create some pretty cool rhythmic movement to your sound or even to other parameters. And then you can also adjust the level of this loop movement here. With this morph knob, you can, when you adjust it, you are morphing in between those two shapes. So now my white line, which is the forward motion, has replaced the gray line, and vice versa. So I'm morphing between my forward and backward waves to create even more extreme movements. The S loop knob is the sustain of that loop, so I can increase the sustain of that loop section of the envelope, and you can hear that when I play a note. Okay. So this is pretty advanced stuff, and to be honest, I personally don't use the loop function in envelopes very much. There are other ways to accomplish similar effects with other modulation sources, but it's pretty cool, and it's good to know that you have that option. And let's look at just a few of the other parameters here, because we're not quite through with understanding what our options here are here. On the left, you'll see a velocity tracking fader. When this fader is all the way up at the top, that means that the envelope is going to respond to the velocity of the key that I strike. So if you're using a MIDI keyboard with velocity sensitivity, then your envelope will respond to the different velocities that you're playing on your keyboard. Similarly, we have a key tracking fader right next to it, and that means that the envelope will respond to the pitch or key of the note that you're playing. So, in other words, if you're going to play, lower notes down on a lower octave, then the envelope will respond differently to lower notes than higher notes. So this kind of makes sense if you think about it in an acoustic world. Returning to our acoustic piano analogy, it has key tracking naturally built in. So if you if you play a low note on the piano, it will have a longer release, and then a higher note on an acoustic piano, and that just has to do with the nature of the acoustics of the lower notes being longer strings and the higher notes being shorter strings. So that's the way it works in the acoustic world, and you can apply that to the synthesizer using this key tracking fader, and you can adjust it from bottom to top and anywhere in between. And now let's move on to the menu header on the top. On the left, you can select an envelope preset, and that's a good way to get familiar with some of the different options. You can go into the factory selection here, and you can choose from some envelopes that come default with massive. So the attack, decay, vibrato looks like this and sounds like this. And you can hear how that works there. And you can see there's that little sine wave in the loop section. Here's a jitter loop, has a short attack, and some jittery blips in the sustain stage there. So you can select some of those like that just to see what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you can see in this envelope, the loop is on infinite, and so it'll just continue moving back and forth until you let go of the key. So you can save your own envelopes here and give them a name, which is pretty cool, and then it'll show up in your user folder. Another option that I use all the time is the copy and paste function. So if you want to have a couple envelopes doing similar things, you can copy your envelope from one envelope and then paste it down into another envelope. That's pretty cool too. here you can delete what you've got, and that's good to have too if you just want to start over. So now we have the trigger 0 reset selector. When this is activated, it means that the envelope will start at the beginning when it receives new MIDI information. So when it's not selected and I play a note, it will move through my envelope. And then if I play another note, while not having released that first note, the second note will jump in wherever that first note is in the envelope. When the trigger 0 reset button is selected, then each new note, regardless of whether I'm holding one, will start down at the beginning of the envelope. The linear button will toggle the shape of the decay slope. So when I reset this, you can see if I have the sustain level down a little bit, the slope of the decay is logarithmic right now. You can see it's curved, and so is the release. The attack by default is always linear. But if I select the linear box, then now my decay slope is also linear, and that can be useful for different sounds, like a wob bass or something like that. So that's good to know that you have that option as well. And then over here, we have these 3 buttons: the gate, one shot, and hold. And these control the course of the envelope. The gate button will be selected by default. That means that the envelope will occur when I strike the key, and it will continue on. But if I release the key before that envelope has completed its course, it will jump straight to the release stage. So if I strike a key, the attack goes up, and it's starting to go to decay down to the sustain level, and then I release the key, it will go straight to the release stage. If the one shot button is selected, then when I strike a key, it will go through the entire course of the envelope, regardless of what time I let go of that key. So when I strike the key, in other words, when I strike the key, the envelope will go over the entire course that is set here. So that's one shot versus gate. When the hold button is selected, on the other hand, that means that if you're using this to maybe trigger a little groove that you have in your morph, and so you can press a key and it will trigger that, then pressing another key will stop that movement and it will move on to the release stage. So that's how the hold button works. So these 3 parameters control the response of the envelope. So that is our overview of envelopes. As you can see, there's a lot going on here, a lot of options, and it's crucial to understand how envelopes work when you're shaping sounds. It's possibly the most important aspect of sound design. So it may be useful to revisit this lecture a few times to really get a solid understanding of what envelopes are and how you can use them to control your parameters. In the next lecture, we'll talk about applying envelopes to different sounds, and so we'll see you there.